Welcome to the Living Connected podcast. I'm your host, Mallory Meyer. I'm a multi-six-figure online entrepreneur, founder of White Wolf Reiki, and creator of the Frequency Business Mastery School. I weave together the metaphysical with the science of the subconscious mind and timeless business principles to help you take your passion for serving and empowering others full time. I'm not just here to teach you how to build a profitable and aligned business, but to invite in more authenticity, awareness, clarity, and certainty in what, who, and how you serve. In return, to generate more sales as you cultivate greater confidence and wealth through deeper self-sovereignty and advocacy, inviting in a trauma-sensitive approach to protocols and processes in our marketing and selling as we honor each client's humanity in the process of living more connected. This podcast is here to connect you further to your self-mastery for business, your lifestyle, and of course, your mindset. Join me on my mission to uplift and elevate the collective to love and light. Hello. Oh my goodness. What a joy it is just to take this time, sit down, and finally come to terms that this podcast, it's happening. For those of you who are new to my community, welcome. I'm overjoyed that you are just taking this moment to tune in to this very first episode. And for those of you who know me, welcome. You've been following me for some time, so you've likely heard me say this has been very strategically procrastinated. And the reason why I also say this is for those who have followed along, especially on my Instagram, you would have witnessed around this time last year me speaking a lot about bringing forward a podcast, but in tangent with my husband. And it's not to say that he won't be part of some episodes moving forward, but this second year that I have stepped in to my business, there has been so much dismantling within my own beliefs in what really created my success in the first year of my business, and ways of which I have been pivoting, holding duality, so much nuance that I am so looking forward to diving in with you and bringing you along more in depth with the journey of what's presently been unfolding for myself behind the scenes as I integrate and really leverage my business in a different capacity. And on that note, let's kick off with a bit of a highlight reel within this episode to really give you a clear sense about who I am and what's led me here. And by here, it means relocating within the last 3 years to gorgeous British Columbia, as well as within that time period, cultivating and generating an income of multiple six figures in a business that I've been full-time in less than 2 years, while serving and impacting clients in such a nourishing, fulfilling way where they are creating a new legacy, a new lineage of their own. They're stepping in and really reclaiming not only their power within, but also their light as they bring forward their passions to serve and elevate the collective as well. So if you haven't quite put it all together yet, I am a trauma-aware business mindset coach. At this point in my time, I say trauma-aware because I am right now in a very integrative leadership program, becoming more trauma-sensitive in my business processes and protocols. But essentially what I do is I help others, energy healers specifically, build and scale a business that's profitable and aligned. But of course, this wasn't always what I did. And one of my biggest lessons before even diving into the journey that it's been to date was really accepting and also holding space to pivot. And I'll offer a lot more clarity behind what this really means and also the lessons that have presented themselves within these pivots, but truly embracing each and every unique experience for exactly what it was at that time. And before we dive into what pivot number 1 really looked like in my journey, it's really just going back to where it all began. And essentially, I've had a past life as a human resources professional. I spent a decade plus, quote unquote, going up that corporate ladder And essentially recognizing that the more that I grew and essentially ascended up that ladder, the less fulfilled I became. And this really stems, though, from a lot of the conditioning I had as a child. And of course, society at that point in time, when I was raised, really putting on a pedestal, moving towards those VP level positions. And I say that because my dad, growing up, held a high level senior position in corporations. Then the glamour and the lifestyle that he led was something that I truly aspired to, but without necessarily acknowledging that wasn't the path for me. And you surely know the classic story. You have your investments and time that you've given to university, and you get embedded into a corporate culture, only to start to realize, if you're listening even to this podcast, this is a journey that you've likely experienced, there is something missing. And all of which you have given your focus and attention to just doesn't necessarily align into seeing and witnessing your timeline unfold to a level of which you can actually truly envision yourself serving someone else's mission while also remaining in that type of environment for a period of time until you have to leave. And essentially, I'm from Canada, and so we have our pension versus the 401k. But it's always to say, like, how could you not live or have a job where you're not contributing to a pension? And so you really get familiar with this safety net. And quite frankly, that safety net kept me where I was. I was making six figures when I left my corporate job, and I just couldn't quite grasp and wrap my head around at that point in time with my mindset, the likelihood of what I was doing, cultivating six figures without burning myself out. Here we are. So lots to celebrate. And I just cannot wait, like I've said from the very beginning of this episode, to really bring you along in this journey. But one big thing that I do want to make note of is just in that time period of the decade that I spent in corporate, one of the biggest pieces that I was disconnected from was truly my feminine energy and the divine feminine working and holding space for that to be facilitated through me in a way that I couldn't necessarily even acknowledge my own intuition. And by intuition, we can tap into so many different ways to speak to this and how I was receiving messages and following those breadcrumbs along the way, but truly sparking and cultivating that creativity and that joy, partially because it was just such an environment of which it was go, 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 and I was so expended that I didn't have that capacity and that breath to even quite be aware of it. So what was really this whole catalyst within my own journey to spark something different and to start making compounding shifts was, and what I always still love to offer, is Reiki, universal life force energy. I'm not going to dive into specifics for anyone that may not be familiar with Reiki here right now, but essentially I went to Nicaragua, and just most recently, I only discovered that this was right at the same time on the date of my Saturn return. And coincidentally enough, I had been moving through that past year or two a lot of narcissistic relationships. And I'm not going to give them the time or energy in this space, but with context, really just kind of sharing before the terminology of ghosting even appeared within our lives, I was ghosted. So it's comical looking back. It's a blessing looking back. But that in itself was truly almost the breakdown before the breakthroughs. It brought forward a lot of distrust, a lot of lack of self-love, of self-confidence, of fear, rejection, worry, anxiety, you name it. Every single low vibration under the sun, I was within. And I sought therapy. Therapy really helped to reshift and reframe a lot of that experience for me, While, as much as I thought I was calling in at that point in time in my journey, a partner that would offer me more safety, is because I hadn't quite found the safety within myself, that vibrancy, that level of which I truly owned who I was, that I essentially had almost a repeat pattern happen. And this is what really led me to that instance and to that experience where I left right on that Saturn return date of December 25th, 2016. And I went to Nicaragua, which was such a beautiful retreat. And something very unexpected took place where I received my very first Reiki healing. And without even knowing it, I already had a lot of pain that I was holding in my neck. And not just from the physical release that Reiki healing offered me, but also just this sensation and this lightness that I had never quite tapped into and understood quite like anything else before. I came back to Toronto, and that was really embracing and welcoming in the year of 2017. And I just immersed myself in receiving Reiki healings, finding the Reiki healer that aligned for me, that took me down the path of my Reiki Level 1 certificate, as I was still based at that time in Toronto, and really just feeling the beacon of light that had been so withheld in me start to glimmer again and start to hold up these new energetic boundaries within who I was calling in, what I deserved, and what I truly desired in my life. And this is also where simultaneously those pings really started to come forward, the nudges within me that there was something more for me to be doing. And this essentially brings us to the first entrepreneurial venture. And this was actually in partnership with one of my best friends. We developed an agency primarily focused around recruitment. It was an agency that truly boomed and blossomed very quickly, almost necessarily to say that it boomed to a level of which we couldn't sustain within the two of us without hiring more support. And what really ended up taking place was a level of equally recognizing this doesn't satisfy my soul and it doesn't light me up. I was already doing talent acquisition within my 9 to 5 and doing a lot of conversations and recruitment, only to spend those other waking hours in my day creating the exact same thing. So we decided to dissolve that company while it was still on very good terms. And coincidentally enough, at that very same time, my husband and I were exploring something a little bit more around the creative arts. So this brings me into that first pivot of accepting that as great as the success and the timeline to which we could evolve this company, it really wasn't at the core something that was true and authentic for myself to have the level of expression and freedom that I desired. And as I even say this, it was really remembering what are my core values. And this is something that we dive into, of course, in working together so clearly. But you need to have such a clear understanding and be so anchored into the reason behind for which you are doing something, but even more so, the values to which you desire to uphold for the life that you wish to build. So in understanding that through that experience and through that pivot a bit further, really starting to recognize, obviously at this point, my husband and I weren't married, but we were really looking at coming into partnerships together and creating a business that was a unique fitness studio. And reflecting back on this time, it was a testament to say the universe knows best. We had a whole business plan in place. We had legal on board. We had our whole name trademarked and everything. So much time, so much energy, so much financial commitment already put into this. That said, we had a huge hurdle in securing the lease of the property, to a point where we came to this decision of, well, what is keeping us in Toronto? I've been born and raised in Ontario, and I lived in Toronto for 10 years. However, my husband is initially from Vancouver, BC, and having a previous partner from BC, I always knew my soul desired the lifestyle, not only in those experiences that I shared with my ex-partner, but also with my father having a home in Colorado. There is something within the mountains that I just craved. And so, with nothing really keeping us in Toronto at this time, as much as we had expended into this business, it was a very clear sign from the universe for us to say, if this is really meant to be, and if we are to be on the West Coast, I'm actually going to apply for a corporate job and see if something comes forward. Simultaneously, in this moment too, we were getting married, but really just putting it out there. And to no surprise, because when you are on an aligned path and you really put that strong intention about what it is that you're calling in forward, literally, I kid you not, within the span of 3 weeks of having that conversation, I had a job offer and a date to be moving out to Vancouver. So here we are already at pivot number 2, releasing and letting go of this venture, this idea. Although we had a little time of exploration when we came to Vancouver into could this be something that we could bring here, we quickly saw that the market was very different. And with that said, what a blessing, because in retrospect, this was right before COVID even hit. And I just could not even see the sustainability knowing that market, and especially in person workouts and boutique fitness places having the revenue to keep that in essentially operation. And within this time period now, between 2018 to 2020, was truly a monumental healing cycle. I went through my Reiki level 2, Reiki mastery, and just had these new levels of not just expansion, but homecoming into the individual that I desired to be. And at the essence of it all, with this journey starting to rapidly unfold for myself, really getting rooted and grounded and living connected. Truly the inspiration in itself for the name of this podcast and where it was derived, because the greater I became connected to my mind, body, and soul, the more I witnessed the flow, the ease, the alignment in all that I was seeking, bringing forth opportunities and possibilities that I hadn't even quite conceptualized to be on my horizon. And I truly owe this gift in living connected to embarking and really exploring that modality and the lineage of work within Asui Holy Fire 3 Reiki. Because just as I mentioned, within seeing opportunities present themselves beyond what I could even envision that were here on my horizon, that of which led me to have a peak interest, and this really just intuitively had come forward within 2020 of getting curious about hypnotherapy. And through this curiosity and connecting with someone in the industry who was certified as a hypnotherapist, they guided me to the certification program, which essentially encapsulated so much more than just hypnotherapy. Something, again, that I really did not expect. And when we think about the whole essence that I've been speaking about in this first episode around being open to pivots, really being open to pivot into recognizing the opportunities of how I could be stepping into, and a lot of the transferable skills that I already had being in the human resources capacity of my work as a life and success coach, as a neuro-linguistic practitioner. And these were the designations and the certifications that I received in embarking on this specific program. And I still say to this day, after going through that entire experience in itself, neuro-linguistic programming is something that should be taught in elementary school, giving individuals, giving children a greater understanding about the model of our unique reality and how, again, we can each create such a different story and have such a different perspective in witnessing the exact same thing in our reality. Something of which I'm really looking forward to diving deep in this essentially realm of the podcast as well. And it really wasn't shortly thereafter in the certification that I received in 2020 that I made the investment and have continued to make those investments into coaches to help support me in this journey. And this wasn't just to learn, receive mentorship, receive coaching to help support the growth of my business, but to also recognize that entrepreneurship is and can be a very lonely journey. And I had been for years essentially always on the brink, and I would almost just self-sabotage, procrastinate, talk my way out of something, and I was just tired of doing it by myself, trying to figure it out on my own. And I really wanted to see those victories, the celebrations, the successes in my business on a timeline much quicker than what I was currently experiencing. 2020 on its own was such a pivotal year when I really reflect back. And I just have to say, like, what a gift in this moment just to have the space to hold this appreciation for how far I've come. Because so often we don't necessarily take that time to really look back and recognize where we are now, because it truly was just in October 2020 when I launched my very first offer. And this model to which I really implemented for my business in my very first year took me to 6 figures and beyond. And it's something, again, I'm not going to unpack in this episode, but it will definitely be coming forth around my journey in how I held my business in the very first year. And especially, as I mentioned from the very beginning of this episode, the dismantling and the transitions that I have now been making, essentially to create, once again, in half the time, 6 figures in my business. But I do just want to make a side note here, because as much as I've made mention of creating the amount of income I have in this short period of time, I'm not driven by the money. And what I really came to realize here this year specifically was a huge driving force is those individuals that I work with in my containers, along with the liberation and growth that I continuously experience, while also just creating such an expansive lifestyle that meets my needs, that serves my husband, that serves our cats and what they need, and always coming back to being in service for the greater good, remaining connected to my heart center, my truth, my authenticity, and always coming back into discernment along this as well, along this course of what we sometimes feel entrepreneurship should look like, and also just accepting too how it's so unique to each individual and finding more of that piece of honoring it in such a beautiful lens. But before we conclude this first episode, I do want to speak to one last pivot, which has taken place this year specifically, along with a little bit in the tail end of last year. And that was really changing not only the positioning and the messaging of my offer, but becoming so much more certain and clear into who I was serving. And as such, ultimately focusing on a very different niche. The way that my services were offered in that first year was on a only one-to-one basis, whereas now the main primary focus is one-to-many. And with that, in honing the messaging, the positioning, the marketing, the selling of the results that individuals have when working with me, it really started to take me out of, as much as I was initially focusing on the spiritual path within the Akashic Records and mediumship, I still love to incorporate those modalities, those ways of offering services to clients in my containers, but they really aren't as prevalent in the way that I deliver my marketing. And I was having a lot of inner conflict with it at first, because one of the reasons why, of course, I left corporate was because the business was so exhausting to me. It didn't really light me up. But at this point in time, it is such a different feeling and it is such a different experience. It was also accepting that I can be a business mindset coach while also being a very intuitive, empathic, energetic, being who channels the Arcturians as well. It doesn't have to be an and/or, it gets to be both. And I can bring that dimensional version of myself into containers with those clients who do desire it. Whereas other times I can put on that hat where it is much more pragmatic and practical, because there is this level of which coming home to myself on such a new level and really feeling whole in who I was being, in who I am. So I equally invite you in to really just get curious with yourself. What are some parts perhaps that you are still rejecting? What are some parts that you haven't quite accepted? And where can you give yourself some permission to invite in some more compassion and love? Because truly at the end of the day, love rules all. So I thank you for tuning into this very first episode, for being here if you choose to be along this journey, and for really starting to participate, even if you do desire. I'm making this a blend of not only some storytelling, some value add into the episodes in how you can take very simple shifts, takeaways, approaches to help support you in building a business, but also witnessing hot seat coaching sessions that I will have an application open for if you desire to be a guest and receive that from me. And I also invite you to bring it all. Bring any questions, bring any feedback in. I'd love to hear if my journey at all resonates with you, where you are in your current reality, and where perhaps you are desiring to be. So as I put my cat here into a slumber snoring, I will take that as a cue to end this episode with, of course, that lesson and that opportunity for you to equally celebrate how pivots are such beautiful experiences, opportunities to reflect, to learn, and knowing that you are just being redirected onto a path of your highest aligned good. Thank you so much again for taking this time in listening to this very first monumental episode of Living Connected. And equally, let's hear what's keeping you connected to yourself in your day-to-day practices and rituals that you invite in. Come find me on Instagram and share with me what that exactly looks like for you. Until next week, we'll talk then. If you're an energy healer desiring to build and scale a profitable and aligned business, there are 2 evergreen opportunities to explore to take that next step together. One is my 10-week course, mastermind, and coaching accelerator known as Frequency Business Mastery School. This is more than just your normal one-to-one course and coaching program. It truly fills the gap that most programs fail to address with this subconscious reprogramming and identity shifts that take place within you. It has self-paced modules, but the program also has these subconscious elements, so we're busting through the blocks that have kept you from experiencing the success that you want, while simultaneously regulating your nervous system to calmly and safely expand your energetics towards that which you do desire to create in your business. You also have teachings and lessons to enhance your psychic gifts and biohack your energy with the tools provided. All of this is delivered into your hands so you can feel empowered and confident implementing beyond this program even when blocks arrive in the future. Secondly, I have one spot open next month to onboard a new one-to-one 6-month client to receive that highest level of support and resources as you choose to build and scale a business. Links for each are available in the show notes.